Okay, so you know who I am, and I'm fortunate that after many years I get to use my Bachelor of Science in Bacteriology, talking about spore probiotics, and I am a clinical nutritionist and a traditional naturopath. My husband still is a practicing naturopath, so we get to see a lot of these products in the clinic and see how they perform as well. So a little bit of background. I moved to Idaho in 2013 when my father passed away, and I was coming just in the summers to fix things up and to continue the farming that he was doing and the ranching. And what I've learned in Idaho is that the farmers that surround us on three sides spray glyphosate about 3 times. The last time on the wheat because it desiccates the wheat or it dries it out because the growing season is very short here in the Northwest. So, and then I found out as we were walking in the woods behind our house that the loggers aerial spray glyphosate in order to kill the underbrush so that they can clear cut. So I'm surrounded on all 4 sides by a lot of herbicide spraying or Roundup. And I started noticing as I got to know the neighbors that 8 out of 10 of my neighbors have cancer. So I am in a cancer cluster. And even the gentleman that sprays alongside of the road for the weeds has Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is directly linked to Roundup. And when I talked to the U.S. Agricultural, the Co-op, the Extension Service, and the University of Idaho, they all say Roundup is perfectly safe. Even the local physician that did a talk on GMOs, who I thought was going to bring some information into the area, I found out he was promoting GMOs, and he made the comment that Roundup is so safe you can coat your tongue with it. So as you can see, we're in an area where it's very remote, and a lot of agriculture is happening here in the Northwest. But Texas is not immune from this. Everything that is sprayed up here in the Northwest finds its way into the Colorado River, the Trinity River, and filters down through the state of Texas and ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. And I spent some time in Houston. We have a mobile office and what I call the microbiome bus. And so we go from city to city in Texas and stay in the RV parks. And what I found there was several individuals that were walking around with, looked like cassette tape recorders on their hips. And so I asked them what it was. And the lady replied that it is chemotherapy. And I said, well, there's a lot of people in this park with those. And she says, oh yeah, but not as many as in the other RV park where most of our friends are. So I realized that people living in these RV parks, this is a normal lifestyle for them. And that there's so many people with, these chemotherapy that I guess and I don't know how many parks are like that. It was just sad for me to think how many on all sides Houston is getting it. They're getting all of the trickle down from the country of all the agricultural in their water. They're getting hurricanes that are causing a moisture of the spores and the mold. They've got the refineries all around them, and so I just there's so much that those in Houston have to be aware of and to really protect themselves. And I sought out microbiome labs because I realized that the soil here, the microbiome in the soil was dead, and that there is a relationship, a synergy between the Earth's microbiome and our microbiome, the human microbiome, and that has got to be the first place of intervention to help because it's the portal of health. And so we've got to have a gut microbiome that can deal with these challenges of Roundup, of mold, of Lyme disease, of all of these outside challenges to our immune system. So that is why I work for Microbiome Labs, and we'll go through the presentation and talk about, specifically how the products work, but know that I believe this company and these products are, as far as I'm concerned, the only hope that's really making a difference in this assault, this, chemical industrialized assault that we're all under. So the first point to make is a comparison between our gut microbiome and the Amazon, just to say that it's so intricate and it's really fragile in that everything that mankind does seems to harm this intricate ecosystem. And it's the same with our gut microbiome. We know more about the surface of the moon than we do our own gut microbiome. There's been some good research come out recently through the Human Microbiome Project and the American Gut. And what Microbiome Labs is trying to do is put back what used to be in our normal ecosystem, and that is these spores. They used to be on our fruits and our vegetables and in our farmland and our gardens, and then we would consume them. Through quorum sensing, they would lodge in the upper intestinal tract. They would colonize. They would make all these great metabolites and help our microbiome, our good gut bacteria, and then they would move on through the feces. They'd go back into the garden, and then this cycle would continue, and this has been happening since the dawn of man until recently, since the Industrial Revolution, and we have broken this cycle. Research shows that infants that are not exposed to these spores, their immune system doesn't develop as well as those who are exposed to it. So it's important to get these spores back into this cycle. And that's what we've done. Each of these individual 5 spores in Europe are pharmaceutical drugs by themselves and have been for 60 years. So we've just put them together and introduced them to the US in a nutraceutical formula, which we're very fortunate to have. So some of the key things about the gut that we focused on in order to maintain the integrity of the gut come in these 3 areas. The first is what we call mucin 1, which you see is like a vast swimming pool with a diversity of organisms, which is represented by different colors. We can see that there is lipopolysaccharide, which is the most potent endotoxin, but in a healthy microbiome, it is diluted by the mucin 1. It's also arrested by the secretory IgA, and it is rendered harmless at this point. The second area of importance are the keystone strains of our gut, and those are the ones that were inoculated or given to you from your mother, and they contain very important strains that are important to maintain health, and we'll discuss those more in detail. And then the third area is this mucin 2, which is a thick gelatinous mucin layer that protects the underlying epithelial cells, which contain the brush border microvilli. You can see these are very healthy cells. They're all intact. The tight junctures are tight, and below them are the circulating immune cells. They are on guard or on patrol for any breach in the system or any foreign invaders. So this is what we would like to see. This is an ideal system. Unfortunately, this is more of what we find in our patient populations, and that is the situation of leaky gut, or otherwise known as metabolic endotoxemia. You can see what generally is attributed to causing leaky gut is listed on the right-hand side. Antibiotics, we know, are very devastating, and they selectively are more harmful for the good gut bacteria than the bad bacteria. So after an antibiotic course, what's first to return is the C. diff, strep, staph, salmonella, etc. Excessive alcohol, smoking, stress, lack of sleep, these are things, we typically do to ourselves in our modern lifestyle. But those of us that are trying to do good, sometimes we overdo it and create a lot of oxidative stress, which is not good for our gut. This category of artificial sweeteners really represents all of the artificial chemical components that we've put into our food chain, colorings, dyes, flavorings, and of course, these sweeteners are also one of the worst. Saturated fats are generally good for our gut, for our bodies, but when you have metabolic endotoxemia, the saturated fats actually create a more potent lipopolysaccharide. So the recommendation here is don't introduce saturated fats until you've healed the gut. And then the last category, glyphosate, the most active ingredient in Roundup, but there are a lot of pesticides on the market, and it's one of the most devastating things to our microbiome. And then there are other things we can also list, vaccinations, genetically modified foods, and a whole host of other pharmaceutical drugs. Now we put these two side by side, and we can clearly see what the primary damage is, and that is in this mucin 2 layer. You can see the lipopolysaccharide degrading, eroding away the mucin 2, and lipopolysaccharide is extremely irritating to unprotected epithelial cells. You can see it causes the zonulin to open up the floodgates and outfloods all of this lipopolysaccharide into the lumen of the cell, where the immune cells recognize it and mount a immune cascade, which ends up as an extreme, inflammatory response. And this many have referred to as gut on fire, and this is how it starts. So we're going to look at some of the literature connecting the disruption of the gut microbiota, or the organisms, to chronic illness. The first, in this paper, we see that the disruption of the microbiota affects the diversity of the organisms, which is directly connected to obesity, inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel, type 2 diabetes, and colorectal cancer. The other thing this paper identifies is intelligent modulation, which is important to recognize that our immune system is, the bulk of it is in our gut, but also the production of neurotransmitters. And that's why we've seen a lot of new science coming out connecting the diversity and the integrity of the gut to emotional and mental disorders. And we'll discuss some of those later on as well. This is another paper connecting the gut microbiota and inflammatory bowel disease. And I'd mentioned too, we're going to discuss these keystone strains. And here is the primary paper discussing Akkermansia musciphilia. And there's some important things about this organism. First of all of the keystone strains, the Akkermansia, Faecalibacterium, and Bifido, can be indirectly correlated with all of these disorders, the metabolic disorders, obesity, diabetes, liver, cardiometabolic. And the reverse is true as well. If there's more of these organisms, there are less of those disorders. But some key things about the musciphilia, in its name, you can see it's a mucin-loving organism. It is also a fat-burning organism, which is important for a country that has a huge obesity problem. And it likes to grow when we're not eating. So this is where the intermittent fasting becomes very important, and the prebiotics that help this organism thrive. And we'll discuss that more. This is another keystone strain, the Faecalibacterium prunitii, and this one can be directly correlated with any of the disorders involving inflammation. So, and again, when there's more of this organism, there's less inflammatory bowel disease and inflammation in general. Now we'll look at some of the research that connects the mucosal barriers to chronic illness. And the first as far as the breach in the epithelial barriers, the first thing to recognize is this is the genesis of autoimmune disease. And as you recall the diagram where the lipopolysaccharide is flooding into the lumen of the cell, what also follows is undigested food. And that is the genesis of autoimmune disease, because the immune system is not designed to recognize undigested food. It's there to see the building blocks, or for instance, the amino acids, not the peptides and peptones. Now, this is one of those papers I mentioned that we would look at. It had to do with the intelligent modulation. Because of the neurotransmitters that are produced in the gut, we can now see a direct correlation between this lipopolysaccharide and the inflammatory pathophysiology of depression. This paper is connecting the digestive disorders with the epithelial barrier function or breach in those mucin layers, such as GERD, reflux, and unfortunately, we're treating them, or the standard treatment is proton pump inhibitors, which is actually making the gut damage worse. And then finally, many people don't realize that AIDS is an extreme case of metabolic endotoxemia. And the reason is because the HIV virus attacks the CD4 memory cells, or the T cells of the gut. And when you can't differentiate self from non-self, there is a severe mucosal immune dysfunction. And this is what is going to cause the progression to full-blown AIDS. So that is the situation. Those are the connections between chronic illness. Now we want to talk about how do we help restore the gut and protect from these chronic illnesses. So Microbiome Labs has designed the Total Gut Restoration Program. It contains 3 primary areas of repair: the reconditioning, reinforcing, and rebuilding. And this is going to take place in these 3 primary areas. So the mucin 1 layer is the area of the reconditioning, which is primarily under the control of megaspore. The second is the reinforcement, which is for the keystone strains, which is under the control of the prebiotics. And then the rebuilding, or rebuilding the mucin 2 layers, is under the control of mega mucosa builder. So here we have the 3 primary areas, and when we finish the presentation, we'll discuss how to strategize for which of these formulas to use and in which order, and how to titrate each of them. So as I mentioned, that megaspore is the primary product to help with this reconditioning step. And because of its features, first of all, quorum sensing, it knows where the upper intestinal tract is in order to colonize. It's able to withstand the harsh gastric barriers of the stomach acid, the pancreatic enzymes, and the bile salts. And the quorum sensing, what quorum sensing is, it's a chemical surveillance system that these organisms use to also tell who's in their environment. So it knows if there's pathogens, how many, and what species. So it can actually come out of the spore stage locked and loaded with a customized antibiotic to kill a specific pathogen. So this is, if we're talking about this as a superhero, this is one of its superpowers that it's able to do. It also produces a lot of metabolites in the form of the B vitamins, including methylated folate, vitamin K2, which is menaquinone, and quinones are what drive mitochondria, produces digestive enzymes, and that's why we take it when we're eating. It also helps increase the short-chain fatty acid production, which is very important to the gut. This is the fuel for the mitochondria. And it's going to drive the populations of these keystone strains. So we've shown that we can increase the diversity by 40%. So one of the primary things that was important as a company to show that any probiotic would have to do is to help heal the gut. And we published this study in August of 2017 in the World Journal of Gastrointestinal Pathophysiology, focused on metabolic endotoxemia. But what we also found was there were a number of other analytes that the spores were able to decrease. And they were significant enough to start their own individual clinical trials. So right now in process, we have a triglyceride study because it reduced triglycerides. The study's on lipids. Since it reduced insulin resistance, we have a study on diabetes. It reduced ghrelin, so we have a weight loss study, and it reduced significant inflammatory markers for the conditions of Hashimoto's and rheumatoid arthritis. So all of those are in process, and once they're completed, Megaspore will be the most researched probiotic on the market. But the primary indicator that was reduced in this study was the lipopolysaccharide, and that's what really put Megaspore on the map. In the spore-treated group, and these are healthy students at the University of North Texas, it was able to reduce the lipopolysaccharide by 45%. What we also found was that the untreated or the placebo group continued to increase in metabolic endotoxemia by 32%. So the net difference between the lipopolysaccharide production between these two groups was over 60%, which is highly significant and very important to realize that we can affect 60% of chronic illness in just 30 days of using this probiotic. So the second step that you would add to the total gut restoration is the prebiotic fibers. And the reason is because these are specific fibers to increase those keystone strains. And this is the science that shows how significant this increase actually is. So the FOS, which is derived from the kiwi skins in the product, is going to increase the Faecalibacterium by 100% in 4 weeks, will increase the Akkermansia by 8,000% in 5 weeks. The GOS derivative will increase the Bifidospecies by 67% in a week, and the XOS will increase the other Bifidospecies by 21% in 4 weeks. So this is very important, will impact those keystone strains. And these are, again, it's the keystone strains and their diversity that are the primary barrier of support to maintain the integrity of the gut. And these are oligosaccharides, so they don't mount an immune reaction. And then the third step is the megamucosa. And there's 3 primary ingredients in this product. The first is the IgG2000, which is a serum-derived concentrated immunoglobulin. It has G, M, A, and D, and its purpose is to help neutralize that lipopolysaccharide. It also is going to tag viruses and parasites and help reduce the burden on the immune system so that secretory IgA can work better. It contains citrus polyphenols, which are a potent antioxidant to help squelch that oxidative stress from the immune cascade. It's also going to contain 4 primary amino acids, which are very important for helping the goblet cells produce mucin. And here's the research that shows that why we selected the particular amino acids, threonine, serine, proline, and cysteine, is because it increases that mucin synthesis by 95%. So we put all of these together, and we've seen some very important and significant recovery of the gut. What's important to realize, though, is that everyone's gut has a very unique microbiome. We don't know going in many times how dysbiotic or how how much gut disruption or damage there is. So there will be or may be some symptoms that will result, which we would want to change around some of the order of these products so that you can help minimize the symptoms. So in general, and I would say for 85% of most of your clients or patients coming through the door, they'll be able to titrate up on each one of these, starting one at a time, and keep on that protocol for about 3 months, let the powders run out, and then maintain with just a maintenance dose of Megaspore 2 to 3 times a week. So the titration specifically is 1 capsule every other day for a week, and then a capsule a day for a week, and then by the 3rd week, you're up to the 2 capsules a day, and you give these probiotics during food. And then you would add one of the two powders, and by a half a scoop for the first week, and then a full scoop the next week, and then start the other powder, a half a scoop for a week, and then a full scoop. And then, as I said, try to keep people on 3 months as an average. To give good expectations to your clients, I always have them calculate how many years they've had a certain condition. So if they've had IBS for 3 years, then 3 months is a good recommendation. If they've had a bowel condition for 10 years, then it may take them 10 months. So I try to give them an expectation so that they're invested in the time it will take for them to heal their gut. Now, what can happen if you've got dysbiosis or you've got more pathogens in the gut than you have good gut bacteria, and the lipopolysaccharide is in the cell wall of the gram-negative bacteria, and they do not want to be evicted. They are quite happy where they're at. So when Megaspore comes into the picture, they start releasing all of this lipopolysaccharide, which in some people that have gut damage, it will usually do one of 2 things. And that is, a lot of lipopolysaccharide can shut down the bowels and cause constipation. If there's exposed epithelial cells, the lipopolysaccharide is very irritating and can cause diarrhea. So those are all clues that you've got either a lot of pathogens or a lot of gut damage. And so then you would want to go even slower with Megaspore. You can divide the capsule into half and just give a half a capsule every other day and start from that point and continue the titration. There's going to be like I said, 15% of the individuals may be sensitive to Megaspore. And some of them, it will help just to go slower, but out of the segment of those hypersensitive people, there are some that cannot do any of the Megaspore at all. And at that point, you might want to start with a pre-treatment of the gut using Megamucosa because of that IgG 2000 to help soak up the lipopolysaccharide, and do 2 weeks of pre-treatment and then start adding the Megaspore, and you'll be able to continue that titration schedule. And then, like I said, add each of the ingredients one at a time. We do have 2 other probiotics, a 2-spore in Restore Flora and a 1-spore in HU58. And there's some specific conditions that you might want to use those. In severe overgrowths of either SIBO or C. diff or hepatic encephalopathy, you would combine those with Megaspore in order to shut down that an infectious overgrowth. Then after this protocol was launched, we introduced Mega Microbalance, which is specific for yeast. And many times an individual doesn't know that they have yeast until they start the total gut restoration, and then it will get stirred up. And mucus can form on top of the mucin layers. And that's why you would want to either push through on the total gut restoration, but in some individuals that manifest a lot of yeast, then the mega microbalance would be very helpful. Okay. So this really concludes the gut restoration. What I'd like to talk about now are just some individual conditions that you've either run up against or that you have questions about, and I'll open the floor.
All right. Tracy, I had a question. You were talking about sealing the tight gap junctions and how everything in Houston is awful. Have you ever spoken with Zach Bush or listened to him talk?
I've heard of his name. I know he has a product, Restore, that has, I think it's a prebiotic mineral formula.
He was just in Houston recently and telling us 75% of our air and rain is contaminated with glyphosate. And a lot of it comes down the Mississippi River to us. And like you said, the Colorado River. Mm-hmm. But his product is basically healing and not doing a lot to rebuild the flora. Right. But it's just very interesting to listen to him. And then people like Dr. Pompa, who I'm working with my sister, uses both in conjunction. Like he starts with healing the junctions and then starts building the flora with your product. Mm-hmm. So it just seems, they seem very complementary. So I was just wondering if you've ever talked to each other.
I have not talked to him. I don't know if Kieran has. That would be very interesting because it seems like there's some complementary aspects. I agree.
Mm-hmm. Very, very much so. And then another thing you mentioned is rebuilding the soil, which is his passion. And he's started a whole nonprofit thing with farmers to do just that. And it's called farmersfootprint.us, which
I want to write that down.
But if you ever have a chance to listen to him speak, I know he travels quite a bit. I don't know what areas he comes to. He came out here through an organic farmers association that I belong to. But really, really interesting to listen to him.
Excellent. Yeah, I too have started at what's called the microbiomerevolution.org, and the purpose was to just focus on Idaho and Texas, kind of a grassroots effort to raise awareness. We don't really know where it can go. We just know that it's really necessary that, besides microbiome labs, which we're talking primarily to practitioners and educating them, as well as helping themselves. Mm-hmm. Working at trade shows, we find a lot of practitioners that are having gut issues, but we wanted to have an outlet for the general public as well. And that's where the Microbiome Revolution. Mm-hmm. So I've tried to combine in most of last year in October and September, I did a lecture for the public and then followed it with a lecture to practitioners. This year I'm in San Antonio this month on the 28th, and we did have 2 separate days, but now because of the IFM being in San Antonio, we've combined them. So we'll have the first lecture of the evening will be kind of a on myth busting probiotics, and then the second one will be more detailed for practitioners. So we're just trying to get, for instance, when I went to that doctor lecture in Idaho, and he's telling people, GMOs are a great benefit and you can coat your tongue with Roundup. I just think that our functional medicine practitioners, need to be out there as well, countering this bad information.
Yes. Yes. Well, I'm a registered dietitian. A lot of my education stuff is sponsored by Monsanto or Bayer, and they're sitting there telling us pesticides aren't bad, and then they give you some website you can calculate how many strawberries you can eat before it's toxic, and you look and it's sponsored by some grocers association who is then sponsored by Monsanto. If you dig, it's terrible. Right. It's terrible that they're promoting all that. It's all about money. Yes. I find it so prevalent in my field. It's just disgusting.
Yes. Well, there's some exciting research that's going to
anyway, I'm working with.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just, you can go ahead. I was just going to tell you who I'm working with, a gastroenterologist who is very excited about your products and wanting to implement them in his clinic, giving them to all his ulcerative colitis patients and everybody. So very, it's exciting because he's excited and I'm going to work with them on the food side, and he's working on them with them, prescribing the different protocols. So I guess I was just kind of curious what different protocols you have for those kind of conditions like the IBD, and that's a lot of colitis. We see. I don't know if you have something specific to that, or if you just kind of start everybody on the same restoration program.
Right. We used to have individual protocols, and first of all, the FDA doesn't want us coming out with protocols, because then we're implying that our products do something, and if they do something, then they're drugs. So I can send some protocols that my practitioners have sent me and just give you some basic guidelines of where to start. But in general, it is about it's about customizing, knowing what the products do, and then customizing a protocol for the individual patient, because everyone is going to be different. So then we went to just this universal protocol that you use Megaspore like what we call not I call it, but some of my practitioners call it the poor man's gut test, or the poor man's stool test, because it will help you determine how damage damage and if there is a pathogen. And at that point, then you start taking actions to mitigate those symptoms. So that's where the Mega Mucosa comes into play. We also have the IgG 2000 as a standalone capsule, and that's very helpful because there are some people that they can't even take a pinch of the Megaspore powder. And in that, IVD, IVT, those are some of the worst cases that we've come up against. And it's helpful then to have in your armory, some options. So that's where the 2-spore Restore Flora or the 1-spore as well will be helpful, because you can ramp up, you can start them with a 1 or 2-spore product and then graduate them to Megaspore. Because what is happening is, while you're starting to heal the gut, then Megaspore is going to come in more almost like a stealth, and be able to start colonizing without kicking up a lot of pathogenic lipopolysaccharide. In that, it's the lipopolysaccharide that is irritating the gut. So you've got to really do 2 things at once, be healing the gut as well as conditioning the gut with the Megaspore, so that you're helping those keystone strains, which are going to be your long-term protection.
Right. So you're saying, so if you start someone on Megaspore and you titrate them up and they are not having any symptoms, would you go on to the other 2 products or just stay on Megaspore? Like you're saying, it's kind of like a test to see how much dysbiosis there might be.
Right. If you can titrate them up.
So I'm thinking of, okay. So if they're fine on Megaspore, is there really a need for the other two products, do you think? Like just like an average healthy person who doesn't have all these IBD or something going on?
Right. I would say right now we know that everybody has glyphosate in their tissue. And I've yet to come across somebody that does not have some gut damage. And, I believe that putting, even someone that didn't think that they had gut problems, I think that they're, for instance, we're seeing a lot of people that didn't know that they had candida. Once you start the total gut restoration and you're I want to say ticking off some of these pathogens, or now you've challenged them. Now the body's going to start giving you some symptoms. So you're going to find that a lot of people that quote unquote thought they had, healthy, gut environment are going to be surprised when a lot of these pathogens start rearing their ugly head.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What was the other question I had? So you said if you start a Megaspore and they start having the symptoms, you said like diarrhea, gas, other things like that, then you back up. And if they're really sensitive, then you just start with a conditioning of the megamucosa, right?
Right.
And then go back to Megaspore.
Yes. Because we find, 80% of
what other symptoms?
What other symptoms?
Well, if they're really not tolerating Megaspore, you said they might have diarrhea. What other? Is it mostly just GI symptoms they would be having?
Yes.
For that intolerance?
GI symptoms. If yeast starts to manifest, yeast can manifest on the tongue, in the scalp as dandruff, on the skin as hives, vaginitis, itchy anus. So that's where it can involve other areas of the body. But in general, 80% of the people, they might have some just mild gas and bloating, and then you go slower, and then they'll be able to work back up. It's that, 15 to 20% you're looking for. Okay. These are your canaries. These are the individuals that are just going to have a really difficult time because they have such a damaged gut. And then you're going to, tell them, we're going to start with a 2-spore or 1-spore combination, and we're going to use some megamucosa to heal your gut, and just explain to them, how they're, what the components in these ingredients are doing for their gut, so that they, because they have to cooperate with you as well. Many people will, even though they've fought constipation for the last 15, 20 years, they start Megaspore and they think they can stop everything else that they've learned in the last 20 years to keep their bowels moving. It's going to take them some more time. So they need to continue drinking a lot of water, exercising, eating, fibrous foods, vegetables, and not consuming all of the offending foods. But what the hope is that as the total gut restoration begins to heal their gut, their food sensitivities, their allergies, their immune system in general is going to work better. And that this is also setting the stage for helping with long-term chronic illnesses that all start in the gut. The autoimmune diseases, the Hashimoto's, the rheumatoid arthritis. And many of these individuals don't associate that with their gut. And now we're also realizing that a lot of the bipolarism, schizophrenia, depression, and anxiety, and this is what's really exciting, the whole mental health industry is realizing the connection for the gut. So when you look at all of these, the question really becomes, who doesn't need a gut restoration? Because unfortunately, glyphosate, GMOs, and everything that was listed on that one slide is so prevalent that I think everyone's in trouble. And unfortunately, even unborn children are affected, in their core blood. there's over 200 different chemicals, including Roundup, that they're being born into this toxic world already immune deficient.
So do you use any of this just ongoing as maintenance? Because I know I heard Kieran say that I think he puts the mega mucosa in his water every day or something, right?
Yes.
I was listening on one of the webinars.
Yes, that's an easy way to just kind of keep sipping on it. You know, you could add the mega mucosa and then the mega prebiotic together, and you know, just it's like a Kool-Aid, you know, through the day. You know, that intermittent fasting.
So what do you do, Tracy?
All of it. And unfortunately, so especially
you're in such a saturated.
Yes, in my toxic environment, I am doing everything every day.
Okay, you do all of it every day.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I was just curious what you do.
Yes. Yeah, and unfortunately, my dad's water supply for where I'm living now was coming from a runoff pond, and that was what he was showering with. And I realized, you know, after I moved up here, that's the first thing I had to take care of was get another well dug, because I had to have fresh water. But I was still probably for about 3 months showering with Roundup. And so I did not do myself a favor.
Yeah.
Moving to.
And you absorb more of your skin than your gut.
Right. So I was coming to Idaho for, you know, a piece of paradise and a healthy lifestyle, and I found just the opposite. But
I think you're there for a reason.
Yes, that has motivated me to, you know, go on this quest. And, you know, we'll be moving back to Texas in the winter. We'll have our mobile microbiome RV, and we're lecturing and teaching. And this is our crusade. And I hope that it'll motivate all of the practitioners to do the same, that everybody at this point needs to rise up, because I think it's that serious.
Yes, it's great. I love what you're doing.
Well, thank you. And I'm excited about the new studies that are coming out. What Kieran designed was a gut model study that had a placebo, a Roundup, and a glyphosate using a pristine microbiome from a 3-year-old child. And again, you just collect the poop, you inoculate these gut models, it allows the microbiome to take hold, and then it was introduced with those chemicals, and we were able to really study what does glyphosate and what does Roundup do, you know, mechanistically to the microbiome environment. And basically, Roundup was so much more toxic even than glyphosate because of the surfactants. Yes, and the inerts that are in it. And then it was important to find out what difference could the spores make. So then the spores were introduced to those 3 systems, and you know, that's the exciting part, that yes, the spores can reverse the process of what those harsh chemicals are doing, because what the state of the microbiome is it looked like cancer, and then the spores were able to start bringing in, you know, reviving those keystone strains, reducing the ammonia, and turning that environment back into, you know, a healthy environment. So that's good news for everybody. Those studies aren't published yet, but that was important for me to know, because, like I said, I'm on a crusade, and this is the primary causative agent is, you know, Roundup that's being sprayed everywhere. So I needed the ammunition. I needed the science in order to go toe to toe with the university, the government, the local clinic, the farmers. I mean, it's, you know, so that's all good.
Right.
Okay.
Very good.
Well, I just want to encourage you to stay in
I
contact.
don't have any.
What's that?
Okay. Oh, I said I don't have any more questions. It was excellent.
Okay.
Lots of good information.
Super. Yeah, anything that comes up, please email me. If we're going to be launching 2 new, very exciting products. And at that point, I'd like to do another webinar and, a strategy session such as this. I think they're very helpful.
Okay.
So I'll invite you to those when those products are closer to being launched. Okay.
Okay, great.
Well,
When is the launch date? Do you have one yet?
When we learned about it last week, they said a couple of months. So it's in the pipeline, but yeah, we're looking about a couple of months.
Okay. Okay, I'll be looking forward to that.
Perfect. Okay, and so I'll go ahead and say goodbye to Laura. I see Rose came on. Rose, if you want to stay on, I'll review what we went over with you. Okay.
Yeah, I missed most of it.
Thanks, Tracy.
You're welcome. Bye, Laura. Yeah.
Did you record this? Or
I did.
Did you record?
I did record it, so I can go ahead and send that to you. Yeah.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I missed it. Not that I'll know.
That's okay. That happens. But I'm trying to find the to stop the recording. What was that?